Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I am delighted to be able to share with you an update on the phased return to school inspections. Our webinar today will be led by Pete Humphries. Pete is a senior HMI, he's one of four, and he's working directly to support us here in Birmingham. And he is standing in, he will explain, in place of James McNeely, who is doing a slightly different role from now on in, certainly temporarily. It's good to see so many of you already here. We're very happy for people to ask questions. We ask you to use the question and answer box, the question and answer section on Zoom, rather than the chat for questions, because it allows us to manage them in a better way. We're proposing that Pete will present for around about 20, 25, 30 minutes on the new phased return to inspections, and then we are proposing to pick up the questions at the end of the session. Again, it's great to have so many of you here. And so, Pete, a very warm welcome, and thank you so much for standing in and agreeing to work with us here in Birmingham. We're very glad to have you here.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, Tracy. And just to say, if we could keep the introductory slide, please. It's going to be a bit Chris Whitty, and to say next slide, please. Just to say that my email address is there, and that if any colleagues have questions which they want to submit to me individually, absolutely can. For example, I'm already in correspondence with a Birmingham head teacher, and we've been talking about inspections of schools that require improvements. Can I just say, we've been inspecting during the autumn and spring terms, and at those inspections, we've been able to personally pass on our thanks to school colleagues, leaders, for all that you've done and you continue to do to make sure that children and young people have an acceptable level of education and are safe. So could I just take this opportunity to thank you for all that you've done and continue to do. Just an introduction about myself. As has been said, my name is Peter Humphries. I'm one of four senior HMIs in the West Midlands, and I'm really delighted to be part of the team that is linking with Birmingham, because actually I'm Birmingham born and bred. I attended Trescott Junior School, which is now Merritt's Brook Academy, and then went to Bourneville School, Griffin's Brook Lane, near Northfield. And apologies for the next bit, I'm actually a Birmingham City fan, so I do apologise to any Aston Villa fans or West Brom or Wolves. I've been in schools for over 30 years as a teacher and then as an executive head. And I've worked in primary schools and secondary, and also been a GCSE and A-level examiner. I've been working for Ofsted now for about 8 years. And the reason that I've replaced James is that Lorna Fitzjohn, some of you may know, is now the regional director in the East of England, and James is the interim regional director, and I'm sure that he hopes that he gets that position on a permanent basis. And James just felt that he couldn't give the time that he wanted to Birmingham, so he asked me to be the link. Also, just to carry on a little bit about me, I have children and grandchildren. I have family members who are teachers. Indeed, one of my relatives is a teacher in a Birmingham school, and also one of my relatives is in higher education, and my wife is a special educational needs coordinator. They keep me grounded and also keep me well aware of all the effects of the pandemic and that has had on schools. I was asked in this presentation to answer the following questions. So hopefully that I do. So how are Ofsted deciding which schools to inspect this term? What are Ofsted's COVID protocols? How will inspectors visit classrooms? Are Ofsted inspecting in line with the current inspection timeline? What would Ofsted do if there was a rise in COVID cases at a school? i.e., can a school ask for a deferral? How will remote learning be inspected? How flexible will Ofsted be about the implementation of the full curriculum in the light of COVID experiences? and what judgments will be reached in the summer term, and are areas for improvement likely to be focused on post-COVID recovery actions. So I hope to answer those questions during this presentation. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you very much. So just to say that the inspections in the summer term are actually our move towards routine inspections. It is highly likely that our move to routine inspections will be in the autumn term, as it says on the bottom of that slide. And Ofsted are very sensitive to giving schools space and time in which to recover from the pandemic. As that first bullet point says there. Our focus in the summer term is going to be on schools that are less than good or have gone a long way or a long time since being inspected. There will be some inspections where there will be graded judgments. I'll explain that shortly. In terms of our plans towards the routine inspections in the autumn term, I'm sure you'll be aware that Ofsted is working with the DFE and other stakeholders on those plans, and hopefully we'll be able to make those available soon. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of the inspections that will be taking place this term. So there's going to be monitoring inspections of inadequate schools, and these where a school is no longer judged to be inadequate, where the school is now giving an effective level of education, actually it is likely that we will convert those inspections, or they will be deemed Section 5. So at the end of those inspections, the inspectors will have gathered a whole range of evidence, will have decided that those schools are no longer inadequate, and so will then give all the usual inspection judgments. So that's for schools that have been judged inadequate. We're also going to do monitoring inspections of some schools that requires improvement, and the priority will be given to those schools that have been multiple times RI, so twice consecutively or more. And then in terms of inspection conversion, where we have serious concerns, usually about safeguarding, we'll convert those inspections to a full inspection, and we'll usually do that within 48 hours. In RI schools that show an improvement, so it is likely that the school is no longer requires improvement, it's probably going to be good. Again, we will convert those inspections and deem those Section 5. There's usually a greater gap there before we come back, not in 48 hours, but that's normally within 4 weeks. So that's if we have evidence that the school no longer requires improvement, but is actually going to be judged good. Section 8 inspections of some good schools, and there aren't many of these, I have to admit, there aren't many of these inspections of good schools, and those are the ones where we have that largest gap since their last inspection. And at those inspections, we'll be confirming the judgment, the school still remains good, or we'll be calling it into question. So we might be deciding that actually the school might be outstanding, or there's evidence that the school has declined. We're also doing, and have already completed last week actually, no formal designation inspections. And we'll obviously carry those on where we have, again, significant concerns about safeguarding or leadership and management. Interestingly, we haven't had many requests for inspections, but just to say, if there's amongst the colleagues, if there's any colleagues, head teachers of outstanding schools, you can actually request an inspection, a graded inspection. During this time, during the summer term, we're also carrying on with area send inspections and revisits to local areas that needed a written statement of action. And we're also doing inspections to initial teacher education providers and to independent schools, doing standard inspections, which are like Section 5s, and additional inspections of independent schools that are evaluating to see if the independent school now meets the independent school standards. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So the way that we've selected the providers for inspection this term, as it says on the slide, so with schools judges requires improvements in their last 2 or more consecutive Section 5 inspections, or schools that have been judged inadequate. As I said earlier, we're also looking at good schools, and outstanding schools can actually request an inspection. Also, we're carrying out risk assessments on schools that have been judged 1 times RI, or that were previously inadequate and then judged RI. And as I said, we're doing risk assessments of those schools to see actually if those schools are improving, so that we can then deem an inspection and come back 4 weeks' time to change the judgments, or actually where we have significant concerns about a school that's been judged requires improvement, where actually we might have to deem that and then do the Section 5 inspection within 48 hours. No secondary schools, actually that's not quite accurate. There will be very few inspections of secondary schools because of the teacher assessed grades that secondary schools will be involved with. So the inspections of secondary schools are likely to start around about June the 21st. Obviously, there are some secondary schools where they're not doing teacher assessed grades, for example, special schools. So those are the schools that will be visited before June the 21st. But the vast majority of secondary schools won't be inspected until 21st of June. Next slide, please. Thanks. Just to draw your attention to the left-hand side of that slide, the handbooks have actually been amended, and that is the link to that handbook. And it's very much taking into consideration COVID, because one of the questions was, to what extent will Ofsted be taking into account the pandemic? And I'd just like to sort of quote straight from the handbook in terms of remote education, because I know that was one of the questions: how will Ofsted evaluate the remote education? And that will be done within the implementation aspect of the evaluation of the curriculum. Because as you know, we're looking at the intent, the implementation and the impact. And so just a quote from the handbook, which has been revised as a result of the pandemic: Ofsted does not have a preferred model for remote education. Inspectors will discuss the decisions that school leaders have taken and how they have implemented them. The quality of remote education between March and August 2020 will not impact on our judgment of the school's quality of education. These are paragraphs 16 to 19 in the handbook. Where remote education remains in place, inspectors may observe remote teaching and review materials. To understand the implementation of the curriculum, inspectors may discuss remote education with teachers, parents and carers and pupils. They may also review completed work and teaching materials. And just to summarise, given those points, when we refer to the implementation of the curriculum in this handbook, we're including remote education. So that's just to give you an example of how we've modified the school inspection handbook to take into account the effects of the pandemic. And then just to go through those points on the right-hand part of the slide. So the quality of education, so the transition statements will still apply. I think that's key, but only as before as to the intent aspect of the curriculum. And the amended handbook has changed the wording to allow for the COVID-19 context. As you know, the 3 factors in terms of the curriculum that we're looking at are the intent, the implementation and the impact. And some leaders have asked, well, isn't it going to be difficult for Ofsted to actually make a judgment about the impact of the curriculum with all the confusion around some of the data that is available? But just to reinforce that Ofsted's measure of progress in terms of the impact of the curriculum is the extent to which pupils children and young people know and remember more. So the curriculum is seen as that progression model. And our judgment is, and our measure of the impact is the extent to which children, young people know and remember more, and that knowledge is then being put into their long-term memory. So the impact of the data during the pandemic has been taken account of in terms of Ofsted's progress measure. Behaviour and attitudes, as it says on the slide, and again, leaders have sort of said, well, how on earth can you measure attendance when you take into account all that's happened during the pandemic? And of course, what we're looking at there is that we can't compare to a national average, but what we will be looking at is are the arrangements that schools have made to secure positive attendance during the interim when we had three lockdowns, about what schools have done to make sure that attendance figures are high. Leadership and management, as it says on the slide, we're looking at that sort of ambitious vision that leaders have maintained during the pandemic. And obviously that is in terms of through remote education, keeping children, young people engaged in their learning, and also making sure that they're safe and well. And again, as it says at the bottom, the process of inspection, we will discuss the impact of COVID-19, and that will be during the first call, but also during the inspection. We will make allowances for the pandemic, and to stress again, we will take the pandemic into account. Thank you. Next slide, please. And one of the questions was, okay, as we return to inspection, how will Ofsted and their inspectors make sure that it is done safely? Now, we've taken advice from Public Health England about carrying out our inspections safely, and all activities will be carried out within COVID-19 guidelines. What precautions are needed will vary from school to school and activity to activity, but inspectors will always ensure that they are acting safely and within the clear guidance given. We will not normally consider deferral requests if we receive them after 4:30 on the day that the school is notified. The regional director or their delegate, which could be a senior HMI or the assistant regional director, will decide whether a deferral should be granted in accordance with our deferral policy. And again, this is available on the gov.uk website. But just to give you a flavour of the deferral policy, where we would normally grant that deferral, is if the provider has experienced a recent major incident, such as a fatality involving a pupil or a child or a member of staff, or where there are serious infectious illness, or concerns in a local area mean that an inspection visit would actually be inappropriate because there has been a major incident, which obviously would be a COVID outbreak. There are COVID-19 restrictions in the local area that require providers to close entirely, and clearly we wouldn't inspect under those circumstances. And then again, at least 3/4 of the users will not be at the provider's setting, for example, owing to a school trip, holiday, or religious festival. And the key there is that 3/4. So again, when we're making that judgment to grant a deferral, we'll be considering the number of pupils that won't be in school. Just to go through the points on the slide, as I said earlier, we will be considering all the guidance that's been available from Public Health England, and inspectors, and we did practice inspections not last week but the week before to make sure that our arrangements worked. And we made sure when we contacted the school, we made sure that obviously where schools requested that inspectors were wearing face coverings if that's what the school wanted us to do, and clearly in terms of hygiene, washing hands before and after, and using hand gel, and observing social distancing. We also, during the notification call on that first conversation with school leaders, will discuss about how we're going to do the lesson visits and how we're going to look at pupils' work. In some schools, the leaders expected us to wash hands, to gel, look at the work, and then do the same afterwards. In some situations, actually, the school teachers took hold of the books and they were turning the pages, but we were able to see work during those practice inspections, and also we were able to visit lessons as well, often wearing a mask. We will also make sure that we avoid high traffic areas during breaks and lunchtime. So that might be on stairwells or actually in corridors. And then obviously we will always be considering the impact the restrictions have had on the school and its improvement work. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you for the comments that have been coming in. Just saw one from Niall Gallagher. And obviously they'll be summarised at the end. So all inspectors will have lateral flow tests just before the inspection, and obviously if we test positive, then we just don't go to the school. So all inspectors will have lateral flow tests. Now, vaccinations, obviously not all inspectors will have been vaccinated because of the sort of age profile of HMI and OIs. I hope that didn't come across as rude. Many will have had their vaccinations, but they're under no requirement to let you know that is the case. If they want to share that with you, obviously they will. But to say that all inspectors will have completed lateral flow tests, and will also take a lateral flow test at the school as they arrive, if that's what you want them to do. No inspector should refuse to take a lateral flow test. Also, we complete risk assessments before we arrive on site, and we do have a copy of that risk assessment if you require a copy. Inspectors have used remote meetings, for example, with governors or with parents to help reduce the number of people that come onto a school site. And again, at that first call, that notification call, those sort of arrangements can be made to make sure that, as I say, we reduce the number of people coming on site. And actually, we found that's been really useful, and we've increased the number of governors that have attended meetings because they can do so remotely and haven't got to travel to the school. As I say, there it's the use of well-ventilated rooms, and again, following Public Health England guidance. We do need to talk to pupils, and again, I know that this is a concern for some schools. And if we can't, as it says on the slide, if we can't talk to pupils, we actually can't make a judgment about the school's safeguarding arrangements. Inspectors will want to be able to talk freely to pupils, but again, we'll do that under advice and guidance from the school. So it might be that we have smaller groups in a larger room, could be in a hall, or actually it could be outside if the weather is okay. As you can imagine, inspectors don't want those meetings to be engineered so that we only talk to those who are part of the various school committees, though we will speak to those pupils, but inspectors need the freedom to be able to choose the pupils that they talk to. But to stress again, if we can't talk to pupils, we can't make a judgment about the school's safeguarding arrangements. Next slide, please. So those are just the arrangements for once the inspection has taken place. And there's a slight change to that. Those who have been inspected fairly recently will see that you've actually got more time to consider the report and to make comments. So, for example, you've got 5 working days. It used to be sort of 24 hours. Now you've got 5 working days for the school to make comments on the draft reports, process and the findings. And then we normally publish the report within 38 working days of the visit. Really would value the feedback through the post-inspection survey, because that's really useful to Ofsted to show what we're doing well and actually the sorts of things that we could do better. obviously we quality assure all evidence bases and reports. That's why inspectors during feedback will always say that the findings are confidential and restricted to those who are present, because obviously as it says there, the evidence base and the report goes through a rigorous quality assurance. And the next slide, please, which should be the last slide. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to take you through the questions that that Tracy and others have asked that I focus on, but willing to take any questions now should anybody have any.
Excellent. Thanks ever so much, Pete. And you won't be surprised to hear that some questions have been coming in. Just a reminder, everyone, if you can pop them in the questions bit, then hopefully it means I don't miss any of them. If they appear in chat, I might just miss them. So I'm just going to take them, Pete, if it's okay with you, in the order in which.
Absolutely fine.
Let me just check this. For RI schools, if the monitoring inspection is to be turned into a full Section 5 with the second part of the visit, will the second part of the visit have a set date, or will it still be with little notice?
There won't be a set date. So, for example, if it's an improving school and it's within 4 weeks, we won't be able to say, oh, and this will be the date of the inspection. So it will be with the usual notice, which will be 24 hours. So unfortunately, we can't guarantee the date. And then similarly, for those where we found significant concerns within 48 hours, or within 48 hours, that's a fairly clear guide that we'll be back within 48 hours. And indeed, some of those inspections have actually converted and carried on. But that's not always the case. So unfortunately, we can't give an exact date of when we will return.
Thank you. Could you advise what the protocol is for schools where the inspection of the antecedent school was inadequate, but it's a new school that has not yet been inspected and is now outside of the statutory limit for a Section 5, i.e. the school opened under a new name and hasn't been inspected in the statutory timeframe?
So if the URN has changed, then that school will be inspected within 4 years. The autumn term inspection, we will decide when the statutory clock restarts. That hasn't happened yet. So yeah, that will be to follow when the DFE decide when the statutory clock can start. If the predecessor school was judged good, it's likely that that next inspection will be a Section 8 inspection of a good school, or indeed if it was outstanding.
Yeah, and I think this next one probably follows on along that theme, really. Schools that have academised since their last inspection will not be inspected unless there are safeguarding and leadership management concerns. Is this correct? Even if it has been several years since their last inspection and were previously RI?
That's correct. I mean, for school changes its URN, the clock is reset. But there's a health warning with that. All schools are risk assessed. For example, if we receive complaints about a school, then that may result in a no formal designation inspection of safeguarding and leadership and management.
Great. And I think the next one you've probably already answered in part, but I'll just read it to you again in case there's anything else you want to pick up on. Can you confirm that there will be a gap up to 4 weeks between the Section 8 and Section 5 inspections of significantly improved RI schools? The Ofsted rolling update from the DFE at the end of April seemed to suggest a change away from this. It says, where inspectors find evidence that an inadequate school has improved and is no longer inadequate, we will be able to convert this to a Section 5 full inspection, which will be graded. Similarly, where inspectors believe a school judged RI shows improvement, we may deem the Section 8 monitoring visit to be a Section 5. This was a change and seems to suggest an immediate deeming of the inspection.
Inadequate schools, there will be, it's part of the same inspection. So during the course of the inspection, this is for inadequate schools. If during the course of the inspection, inspectors have enough evidence to suggest that the school is now providing an acceptable level of education, and if safeguarding is issued, safeguarding is now effective, once they've got that evidence, and then they've got enough evidence to award the judgments, they'll deem the inspection right at the end of the inspection and say that this is section 5, and then award the judgments. That should not come as a surprise to any school leaders, because obviously the lead inspector and other inspectors will be holding keep in touch meetings to say, what we're now doing is we're collecting that evidence to see if actually there is an acceptable level of education. So inadequate schools, that is likely to be part of that monitoring inspection. So within the 2 days. With the requires improvement schools, where schools are improving, it is within 4 weeks. So that is the period of time where there are significant concerns within 48 hours, but where there are improvements within 4 weeks. Now that may be shorter than 4 weeks, but it's within 4 weeks.
Great, thank you. If we had a visit from Ofsted in October regarding reopening, and in February regarding remote learning, would a school that is still RI receive another inspection? So in other words, they've already had 2 visits this year.
We are prioritising those schools that are multiple RIs. So at their consecutive inspections, the last 2 or more were judged requires improvement. We are prioritising those schools. If a school is 1 times RI, it may be inspected if we think we have intelligence, or the Regional Schools Commission or the local authority has said, actually, this is an improving school, possibly a declining school. Again, we will prioritise those schools, but the priority is to multiple RI schools. So it is likely that there will be another inspection.
Thank you.
There's a slight shift though, because now we can decide to deem the inspection a section 5 and change the judgment, and that started this week. So that the ability for us to be able to change or to convert or to deem an inspection started this week. So if we see significant improvement, we can deem it an inspection and actually award the full range of grades. We weren't allowed by the DFE to do that until this week.
And someone else is asking, can you clarify, please, if it is all good schools that are within the 5 years window or some good schools?
Some, not all.
Okay, thank you. Will RI schools that have been monitored, I think you've already answered this, but just to clarify again, will all RI schools that have been monitored over both the previous terms be monitored again from the 4th of May? And I think what I heard you say was it's the schools that have been RI more than twice.
Yes, they're our priority schools, yes. And those where we have, as I say, information that a school may be improving, because leaders have said to us, actually, we've been stuck on this RI or this inadequate judgment for so long now. Actually, we want the chance to prove that we're no longer inadequate, or actually we are better than requires improvement. So we're prioritising those schools where we think there are improvements. Clearly, where there are significant concerns, we also need to visit those schools as well. Because obviously we have the best interests of children and young people at our heart.
And if, again, I think you've answered this, but just so that we've got a distinct answer for this question here. If a new school opened within the last couple of years, still hasn't had an Ofsted visit, will it get a visit in the autumn, or will these start during the summer?
It definitely won't be in the summer, because as I've said, the focus is on inadequate schools, multiple RI, some good schools, possibly in the autumn term. And please don't hold me to this. I think it might be beyond the autumn term, if it's a new school, if I understood the question correctly.
Great. And this is a follow-on from a question that was asked earlier from Sam. If we academised in May 2017 from a previously inadequate school, can we expect the summer term inspection or wait until autumn now?
Definitely wait till autumn. Again, to stress, the focus is on inspections of inadequate and multiple RI schools, with no formal designations of the schools where we have concerns.
And one last one, I think this is from Jane, actually one of our the head teacher of one of our schools in Birmingham. If school was good but became RI in September 2019, will they get a monitoring visit in the summer term?
So that's a one-times RI because they were previously good, unless our risk assessment suggests that actually there are significant improvements, and therefore we might deem that inspection and award the judgments because it's now a good school, or where there are significant concerns, and therefore we would do a full inspection within 48 hours. If it met that criteria, we might do an inspection. However, otherwise it's unlikely. But again, I can't say for definite.
Okay, so that seems as though we've come to the end of our, just as I thought I'd done them all. I've got something from Nathan here, who's thanking you for your presentation. For schools waiting to be judged as possibly outstanding, current good, following Section 5 inspections, what sort of time frame are you looking at?
That's a really good question. They're all good questions, but that's a really good question, because actually, until we know when the statutory clock has been reset, I can't give a definite answer to that. As I say, my email address was included, and if colleagues want to send specific questions about their schools, I'd be more than willing to accept that. I mean, obviously, I can't give definite dates and let you know when we'll be inspecting. But if you do want to send an email, as I say, then I'll reply to that about the likely window for inspection, especially when we know more.
And another attendee has asked, what is meant by risk assessment of schools?
It's the information we get from, for example, and I'm not saying this is, I don't know to which school we're referring. Sometimes we receive complaints. Ofsted receives complaints about a school, so that would inform our risk assessment. Under normal circumstances, it might be the school data that we have. It's information from local authorities, from the regional schools commissioner, any safeguarding concerns that may come to us via care, local authorities, care agencies. So there's quite a bit of information that informs those risk assessments.
Thank you. And I've just picked up one comment that came in on the chat. And I think you've been very clear about this term, but they're asking about outstanding schools, outstandings in that we've got there outstanding in 2012. Will they be due?
Again, it's the outstanding schools. It'll be the biggest gap since their last inspection, and that's how the priority will be organised and arranged. So it'll be the schools with the biggest gap since their last inspection.
That's really helpful.
And any other information that we might have about the school. And of course, as I said earlier on, actually head teachers of outstanding schools can request an inspection.
Yeah.
You might do that. You might be a new head, and actually you just want to confirm that the school is outstanding, or you might think that the school is no longer outstanding. That is for the head teacher to decide.
And just to say I think it came in from Selina. I mean, Selina, we're aware that there are some outstanding schools in Birmingham that had their outstanding in 2009. So, you know, that's just to kind of put that in context that we've got schools that have been outstanding longer than yours. Another question in the Sally, who works in one of our great nursery schools in the city, is that outstanding maintained nursery schools too?
In terms of what, sorry?
I'm
assuming terms of the gap for inspection.
The gap for inspection and or requesting an inspection.
Oh, sorry. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Can request an inspection, yes. And that would be up to James's, as the regional director now, his discretion as well. So, and in fact, anybody can request an inspection at any time, and the regional director would make a judgment on that.
And Sally was also wanting me just to check, and the gap itself, is that for her outstanding nursery, is the gap the same? So if there are schools that have got a bigger gap?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so I think that's picked up on all of our all of the questions and answers. I'll keep an eye on it as I'm chatting. Just to be sure, everybody, we have recorded this webinar from Pete this afternoon, and it will be put on onto our website, onto the front page of our homepage on our website immediately following this, so that anybody can listen to it and replay it backwards. We are also, Pete has very kindly offered some of his team to do some more of these follow-up updates for you regarding kind of best practice as far as Ofsted are concerned. We're going to be providing you all with one on reading and improving reading. We're going to be providing you with one on SEND and working with children on SEND, and also one on a more generic kind of how Ofsted sees its curriculum, the intent and the implementation and the impact. So those will be coming up in the next few weeks as I book them in with Pete. We're proposing again to hold them at this time of day, and then to record them and make them available to everybody. If there is something that you think it would just be brilliant if Ofsted could give us a webinar on something, please do drop me a line and or to BEP generally, and we can do something with that. There is one final question here that's just come in.
Tracy, can I just add to the reading first?
Yeah.
As colleagues will know, that reading will be a definite deep dive in primary schools, and also in many secondary schools. We're also looking at how pupils' reading skills are developed, especially for those in the bottom 20% of readers. So when we all, decide on a date for that reading, would really encourage colleagues to come to that, just so that our approach to evaluating reading can be made clear.
Excellent, thanks very much. And it wasn't a question that's just popped up, it was a thanking you very much for your presentation, Pete. So just to echo that,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time this afternoon, and the fact that we arranged this at such short notice. We have got a school that's got a monitoring inspection tomorrow, so hopefully your information tonight will have really helped. This afternoon will have really helped. So thank you.
No, absolutely. I hope so. And we want to try and be as open and transparent as possible. And as I say, more than willing to take questions via my email address.
Perfect. In that case, I'd like to thank you all very much. It's great to see so many of you here, and I know this will be watched many, many, many times more by more heads in the city. Thank you all for your time, and have a pleasant evening. And Pete, thank you again very, very much.
Thank you very much.